So this video is about chemical reactions. Here are the vocab words we'll go over today: chemical change, physical change, production of heat or light, production of a precipitate, production of a gas, substance, color change, and temperature change. Heat or light. So this is evidence of release of energy during a chemical change. So if you have a fire or something else that gives off heat or light, that is evidence of a chemical reaction. Okay, so light bulbs have electricity that passes through them, and they light up, and they also give off some heat. Okay, our second word is production of a precipitate. So this is pronounced just like precipitation, like rain or snow. It just doesn't have the last part, so it's precipitate. So this is evidence of a new substance formed from a chemical change, solid particles that form out of a liquid. So when you pour two liquids together, after the end of the chemical reaction, you have a solid that has been formed. So the solid comes out of nowhere when you had two liquids that poured together. So the solid part is the precipitate. So here you can kind of see there are two liquids that are mixed together, and then kind of throughout the liquid there's this kind of yellowy or whitish solid kind of mucky stuff. That will be the precipitate. So production of a gas is also a piece of evidence you could use to see if there's been a chemical reaction. So it's evidence of a new substance formed from a chemical change. So this could be bubbles or something like that. If it's a liquid, it might have bubbles in it. If it's not a liquid, there might just be gas that's released. So if there's gas that's produced because of your chemical reaction, that's evidence to use. So this is a fun experiment you can do, or we might do in class, where you take a plastic bottle, you pour some baking soda in the bottom, then you pour in some vinegar, you put a balloon over the top of the bottle, and then as the baking soda and vinegar react, carbon dioxide gas is given off, and it will actually blow up the balloon a little bit because the gas is rising out of the bottle. Substance is any form of matter that is uniform throughout and has consistent properties. We've actually already covered this one and is not really in our notes, so sorry about that. Okay, so color change is a visible change in substance coloration, and it is evidence of a new substance formed from a chemical change. So this would be an unexpected chemical change. So if you have one liquid that's blue and you have a powder that's red, you would think when you combine them together that you would get purple, but maybe they react and the color changes to green. Okay, so that could be an example of a color change. Keep in mind, this does not include just adding like food color to something or coloring something a different color. Those are not necessarily color changes. This is when the materials, like you combine them and they just change color on their own. Okay, so here's an example of a color change you might see on the left. It was blue, and then they added something to it and it kind of turned pink or red on the right. Okay, so another piece of evidence we could use to see if we've had a chemical change is a temperature change. So this is an increase or decrease of heat energy in a substance, and it may be evidence of a new substance being formed. So some chemical reactions create heat. So if you've ever used a hand warmer where you like crack the middle of it, the two substances mix together and it warms up, that is an example of a temperature change giving off heat. If you've ever used a portable or disposable ice pack, like if you got hurt, you crack the middle of it, the substances combine, and it gets cold. So that is an example of a chemical reaction where it is actually taking in energy so it feels cold. Okay, so here we're kind of having a couple of different pieces of evidence here. So we have different colors. There's obviously a gas being given off, and I think this is supposed to illustrate also a temperature change with the bubbles at the top of that test tube. A chemical change is a change that alters the identity of a substance, resulting in a new substance or substances. So here we have a nail, and nails and other metals can rust, and that's when the metal reacts to oxygen in the air, And rust, if you've ever seen it, is a new substance. So you had a car or a bike or something, it was exposed to oxygen and rust formed, which is this orange or kind of dark red kind of crust that forms on the metal. It didn't used to be there, it's new, and it's a new substance that was formed. So chemical change, there's always something new at the end of the process. So fire is an example of a chemical change. So this wood is being changed from regular wood into ash or like burnt wood. And the fire is the evidence of that change. So it is giving off light and heat and maybe some sound. And so the fire is part of the chemical reaction. Okay, a physical change is the opposite of a chemical change. This is a change to a substance that occurs without forming a new substance. So examples of physical change are states of matter changes. So if you're going from solid to liquid to gas, or back to liquid or back to solid, those are physical changes. So like water, when it's ice, is a solid, but it's still H2O in its formula. When it melts, now it's a liquid, but it's still water, H2O. Then when it boils and it becomes a gas, now it's a gas and it's kind of spread out even more, but those molecules are still H2O. So nothing has changed about the actual makeup of the substance. So it's still water. Okay. If you have a chemical change, you're taking in substances, they're reacting, and you end up with something new at the end. With physical change, you still have the same thing you started with. It hasn't changed its identity at all. So exactly, here's my example. Ice is melting, turn it into liquid. It's still water. Nothing has changed about what the substance is. A way that you may be able to remember the 5 types of evidence that you might see with a chemical reaction. First, it's called please excuse, coughs, sneezes, and burps. So the first word is precipitate. So remember, that's when you pour liquids together and the solid shows up out of nowhere. Excuse stands for energy, and this can be any type of energy. It could be light or heat or sound or motion or chemical energy in your stomach. There's all kinds of different types of energy. Coughs stands for color, so there's a color change. Sneezes stands for smell. So sometimes you may have 2 substances that don't really smell at all. You mix them together and suddenly it smells really bad. So that could be an evidence that a chemical change took place. And burp stands for bubbles, which is when gas is being given off. Okay, so now on to our notes. So production of a gas is when 2 reactants, so that's your 2 ingredients that go into your chemical reaction. When 2 reactants combine, bubbles can form, indicating the production of CO2, which is carbon dioxide. So an example is vinegar and calcium carbonate. So calcium carbonate is this powder stuff. It's called baking soda. You might have heard of it. So when vinegar and baking soda combine, carbon dioxide gas is given off. So change of color. Many times when the pH of a solution changes, the color changes. So if you were to have a copper wire that's dipped in a silver solution, it will change color. So I understand that this may not be the most easy part to understand, but just know if you mix some things together and the color changes to something you really wouldn't expect, that's a good sign that you had a chemical reaction. So temperature changes. So not all temperature changes are chemical. So example, melting, freezing, and boiling water are physical changes. So that has changed the temperature of the substance, but it has not changed what the substance is. It's still water, just like what you started with. 2 substances of the same temperature can cause a change in temperature. So let's say we have, again, like the baking soda and vinegar. We keep them at room temperature. They're both the exact same temperature. When you mix them together, the solution or the mixture inside of your container is going to get a little bit colder. So even though they started at the same temperature, the chemical reaction caused a temperature change and the temperature went down. Of light is when a substance rapidly combines with oxygen. Combustion occurs. So combustion is when something catches on fire. And a flame is produced that gives off thermal energy and light. So an example is a lit match. So the stuff at the end of the match reacts with the oxygen in the air when you strike it to light the match. And it gives off thermal energy, which is heat, and light. So precipitate is an insoluble compound formed out of a solution. An example is silver chloride. So again, this is when you have two liquids, which would form a solution. You should have learned about that in primary school. And it forms a solid at the bottom of the container, or maybe it's floating throughout. But you pour two liquids together and boom, suddenly you have a solid in there somewhere.